As white attacks started to increase during the mid-1940s and the late 1940s, the blacks started to organize their clubs, really as a defensive mechanism. And the boss men or the businessmen and the Schneider boys and all these clubs in South LA really were just sort of defending themselves against white violence that was coming from Huntington Park and Southgate.
Alejandro Alonso is a gang historian and urban geographer who has studied the effect of street gangs on the urban landscape. He also runs a well-respected website devoted to the topic of LA's street gangs.
Well, in the early 1960s is when you start to see the white residents have already started to migrate out of the central city and into the suburbs and into the valley. So what you have in place is sort of this black club/gang structure that eventually started to conflict with each other.
It was into this environment that a young Raymond Lee Washington and his family arrived from Texas. Born in 1953, Raymond soon hooked up with the Avenues, one of many gangs active at the time.
In the 60s, we had like, the Slausons, the Gladiators, the Businessmen, the Rebel Routes, and basically, back then, it wasn't, not real violent,
Greg Batman Davis would eventually become a founding member of the Crips and is one of the few still alive today. For the first time on television, his exclusive interview reveals the genesis of the gang from its inception and provides a first-hand portrait of the modern gang world. Batman has long since retired from the gangbanger lifestyle, but in the early 1960s, he was a fledgling member of the Businessmen and engaged in the battles of the day.
You might have a gang fight, you might see bumper jacks sometimes, you might see chains, you might see a knife, but it wasn't basically, you get in a gun and kill somebody,
The fights during that time period usually emerged over something such as a girlfriend, or sometimes these clubs engage in football competitions with other clubs, and not all the time that the game will end in a peaceful manner.
We had to fight, we had to fight, and that's what I like, because on the strength that whether you win or lose, when you get ready to fight a person again, that same person, he think twice before y'all fight again, because he remember what happened,
As some of the blacks that lived in the east side started to break out of the central Vernon ghetto and move on the west side, which was considered a more affluent area at that time, there was sort of this economic disparity between blacks who were able to move on the west side and blacks that weren't. So then you start to see this conflict expanding in numbers and in turfs. And I believe in 1960, there were about 6 homicides, which was considered a lot during that time period.
Back then, they had, like, zip guns and stuff like that, but, at that time, I was still kind of young. Didn't nobody want to show me how to make no zip gun, so I had to figure it out. I made a 38 zip gun. I made a 410 zip gun. Like I say, back then it wasn't too much, about no gun, because everybody was believing
in
it.
In 1965, there was a whole bunch of organizations and programs started in Los Angeles by the youths who used to be in these clubs. And one of them was the Black Panther Party, which was originally founded in Oakland. LA started a chapter under a guy named Alprentice Carter, also known as Bunchy. And he was a Slauson member, a club that existed in Los Angeles from the 50s throughout the early 60s. So as he became the president of this chapter, it started to get a lot of youths involved in this new movement.
Raymond, he knew Bunchy Carter. A whole lot of us knew about the Panther Party coming up, That was something that I just wanted to be a part of. And plus the way they dressed, that kind of turned me on with the tam tilted and all that. That was cool. I liked it, all that.
While most of the U.S. condemned the Black Panthers' revolutionary agenda, their message of community-based independence struck a chord with the residents of South Central. And even though they were too young to join, it is likely Raymond and his cohorts absorbed the Panthers' rhetoric through rallies and outreach programs in the community.
The Black Panthers was pushing brothers to go to school. They was feeding breakfast in the morning. We was having breakfast and stuff. Like I told you, I wanted to be a Panther, but wasn't going down. My mother wouldn't let me be one.
In late November of 1968, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover issued a memo directing his agents to exploit all avenues of creating dissension within the ranks of the Black Panther Party. Hoover's strategy involved counterintelligence measures pitting the Panthers against the US organization, another Black Power movement under the leadership of Ron Karenga, creator of the Kwanzaa celebration.